40,000 Syrians at risk of starving to death. That is according to the UN World Food Program, which says people are in dire conditions, and winter is making their plight even more difficult. So is there any hope for millions of Syrians? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Richelle Carey. As the war in Syria enters its 5th year with no signs of the fighting coming to an end, millions are struggling to survive day to day. Now a series of strong storms have blanketed much of the country in snow. Syrians living in towns and villages besieged by government forces and their allies are facing starvation. The blockade of the town of Madaya, in particular near the Lebanese border, has become a focal issue for Syrian opposition leaders. They told the UN envoy this week that they will not take part in talks with the government until the siege there and other areas are lifted. We'll get to our discussion in just a moment. But first, Al Jazeera's Jamal Al-Shayal has more on the conditions in Madaya and a warning. Some viewers may find the images in Jamal's story disturbing.
My name is Muhammad Isa, says the starving little boy. I'm 7 years old and I haven't eaten in more than a week. Not only does he have no clothes, his body, starved of any nutrition, has little more than the skin covering its bones. Muhammad is one of almost 40,000 Syrians being starved to death in Madaya, a town on the outskirts of Damascus. It's been under siege by government forces for months now. There's no food or medicine here, while the bitter cold of winter adds to the immeasurable suffering of those struggling to survive. Day by day they die though, with no one either able or willing to come to their rescue. After seeing death by tanks, barrel bombs and chemical weapons, now Syrians are experiencing it through forced starvation. The siege of Madaya is being described as yet another war crime committed by President Bashar al-Assad's government and his allies. According to locals, Hezbollah fighters control the entrances to the town, preventing anything from going in. So people like this man are forced to eat whatever they can find, leaves and shrubs. But all that does is slightly delay the inevitable, death. A look into the eyes of children like these is all it takes to understand that humanity itself is being killed in Madaya and the rest of Syria. Jamal Al-Shayal, Al Jazeera.
And Syrians who've escaped the war at home are also facing bitter winter conditions in Europe. Aid agencies say refugees and migrants traveling through the Balkans are ill-equipped for the rain and the cold. Organizations including the Red Cross and the UNHCR have begun handing out hot food and beverages, as well as blankets and rain gear along the Serbian border. But in France, police are blocking aid to one of the country's largest refugee camps, housing 2,500 people. Constant heavy rain has devastated the camp at Grand Saint. Well, for more on this, I'm joined by my guests in Geneva, Melissa Flemming, spokeswoman for the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees. In Durham, Thom, a law professor at Durham University in the UK. He specializes in immigration. And also in Geneva is Dibeh Fakhr, the public relations officer and spokeswoman for the Near and Middle East of the International Committee of the Red Cross. And welcome to all of you. Jamal's story was difficult to watch, but it was very important that people not turn away and they actually do watch it and process it, because this is happening to real people. And Melissa, I want to start with you. Tell us more about the conditions that led to what is happening in Madaya.
Well, you know, in a way, it's good that those photos came out finally, because we believe there are 400,000 people in Syria in 15 towns and cities who may be starving like they are in Madaya.
So much more than just that
really
one town.
A dramatic situation. Absolutely. You know, the besieged, there are many besieged towns, besieged by different groups. And it pains us as humanitarians to not be able to reach these people. No, we have the medicines, we have the food, we have the warm blankets and the equipment. We just do not get the authorization from whichever party is besieging the town to get in, and it's really horrifying. But I have to say, today, the UN in Damascus just announced the news that the Syrian government is now allowing access for humanitarian organizations. UNHCR will be going in with the humanitarian convoys in the coming days to Madea, hopefully to stave off some of the starving, to deliver supplies and medicines and food for the civilians there who are suffering so much.
That is fantastic news, but obviously it's probably going to be too little too late, but it's better than nothing. But this is great. Tell us more about this development. How long will you all be able to be in there to do what you need to do?
Well, this is not clear, but the first signal is to get access. We're used to delivering in very difficult situations, but thus far we've only reached 10% of the besieged areas. So it's a breakthrough that we're able to get in. We'll have to see what the conditions are and how long the delivery will be. The last time we were able to, as the UN, deliver in Madea was in October. So it's been a long time, and it's really cold. It's it's high altitude, and there's no heat. So the people not only are starving, they're freezing. So they need everything. And we'll do what we can as the UN, as the ICRC. I'm glad we have a colleague from ICRC there. They're doing amazing work in Syria, and including the Syrian Arab Red Crescent, to deliver to people in really, really, really difficult areas. So step by step, we hope that we will have access all across Syria. It is really against international law as a tactic of war to allow people to starve.
That was actually my very next question. As I'm sure you saw in Jamal's reporting, there are people that are saying that what is happening here is in fact a war crime. Do you agree with that assessment?
Look, international law prohibits starvation as a war tactic, or targeting of civilians for that matter. So we really call on all parties to spare the civilians here. They have no part in this conflict. They deserve to survive.
Dibeh, I would like to bring you in on this conversation. Melissa has said that obviously Madea is what's getting a lot of attention now, but this is happening in so many other parts of the country. Tell me more about what you know, what you've seen, what your organization is doing.
Indeed, Richelle, and as Melissa said, this is nothing but an example of what's going on in many other areas in Syria. We shouldn't forget that today there are around 12 million people inside Syria who are in dire need for help. There is almost 500,000 people who live in besieged or hard-to-reach areas. So Madea is now taking the attention, but we should remember that there are other areas that took the same attention, such as Muaddamiyah, such as Douma, such as Yarmouk camp, and many other places in Aleppo or elsewhere. In October 2015, when we last managed to go to Madea, we saw despair, we saw hunger in the eyes of the people. We saw mothers who weren't able to breastfeed their newborn babies because they weren't fed well enough in order to be able to provide the milk. We saw people desperate for food, for medicine, for water. There was no electricity. The city looked like a ghost city for a place where you have 40,000 people living. So we knew already in October that the situation was dire. But we're not only talking about Madea. Today, for us, the priority is to access Madea, Zabadani, Kefraya, and Fua, these besieged areas where the needs are huge. We know that the needs are huge. We are in contact with people inside Madea. But today, for the International Committee of the Red Cross, we're not in a position to confirm that there is starvation happening in Madea or that people are dying because of that. We know that there are needs. We know that people need food. But today, we're not present in Madea itself. And our priority for the moment, together with the Syrian Arab Red Crescent, is to be able to get access and to bring again very much needed assistance to the people inside.
So I understand what you're saying, that it's difficult for you to confirm it yourself because you actually can't physically get there. But let's talk more about Zabadani. You just mentioned it, that it was just a couple of weeks ago that this prisoner exchange happened, and what that was supposed to do, that was supposed to alleviate the situation there, to allow aid to get in. Yet we hear that there is still so much suffering going on. So what became of that?
Well, if we talk about this particular example and the evacuation of the wounded people that took place, we should not forget that this operation took more than 3 months of negotiations. It was brokered by the UN, and the ICRC and SARC were part of it to help with the evacuation. But it was a very, very long and hectic and difficult process, long negotiations. And as I said, it took more than 3 months. So today, when I speak to my colleagues in Syria and they explain to me how difficult it is to negotiate or how difficult it is to access, it is actually very frustrating. And of course, we don't give up and we still try, but some issues, they need very, very, very long time to become concrete on the ground. Indeed, the UN brokered agreement was talking about evacuating severely wounded people, but then bringing in assistance. The last time we went to Zabadani before the evacuation, we managed to bring a little bit of assistance, but the idea was to come up with more. And today, it's still not the case. So for us, the number one priority and our call to all the parties involved in the fighting, because today we're not negotiating with one party only. We're negotiating with all parties on the ground or in the skies, all those who are involved in the Syrian conflict. We need immediate access. Humanitarian organizations, UN agencies, ICRC, SARC, we need safe and unimpeded access to areas, whether that are besieged or difficult to reach or where combat is really becoming harsh, because people are in dire need. 5 years of conflict, it's too much. Millions of people are desperate for at least food. Economy is very, very weakened. People are on their knees. Infrastructure is destroyed. So you can imagine how desperate the people are. And I don't know if catastrophic is enough to describe what's going on in Syria today.
And in fact, the situation that you describe is not only affecting Syria, it is affecting the neighboring area as well, because so many people are fleeing. So let's actually take a look at the situation outside of Syria this winter. The vast majority of the 4 million people forced to flee their homeland are in neighboring countries like Egypt, Jordan, and Lebanon. Egypt is hosting 128,000 Syrian refugees. UNHCR aimed to give a one-off cash grant of $28 to 48,000 of the most vulnerable in Greater Cairo and Alexandria. More than 600,000 refugees are sheltering in Jordan. There, the UNHCR's winter plan will support 229,400 vulnerable Syrians. That is 37% of the population. And in neighboring Lebanon, more than half of the country's 1 million plus refugees live in substandard shelters. The UNHCR has doubled the number of people receiving cash grants for the winter. Thom, I just talked about where so many of the refugees are going to neighboring countries. Obviously, as we know, the refugees have been going to Europe as well. In particular, Germany accepted more than 1 million refugees. Angela Merkel has tried to be a leader for the EU, but the fact that the European Union is not on the same page, how has that complicated the situation for the EU and for the refugees?
Well, the numbers are incredible. Looking at them, and the suffering is really difficult to view and take in. Germany has tried to take a lead on this issue for Europe in being, in a sense, the most accommodating, followed closely by Sweden. But I think there's also been a price that has been paid by this. So on the one hand, you have a message coming from those European countries, Germany, Sweden, and some others like the Netherlands, that has been more accommodating and more open, and even sometimes flouting EU agreements on how refugees will be handled and managed in the European Union. And then on the other side, you've got countries, perhaps led by the UK and some others, that have been giving a very different message. You've also seen fences going up on the border of the European Union. So you have this cacophony of different countries scrambling, giving different messages, and it just, I think, compounds the misery for everyone, because there's no kind of clear view anymore about what Europe's view will be on refugees who come to their door, what would happen next, how people will find safety and have a future, given that so many different countries have scrambled to come up with their own policies and fled from each other. And I think one of the outcomes of that problem is that you've got different groups, different countries are now facing different pressures, and we're starting to see some backlashes in various parts of the European Union in relation to this that may well have been avoided if Europe spoke more with one voice.
How would you characterize those backlashes?
Well, the backlashes have been, to some degree, predictable. So countries on the border that have, countries on Europe's border, such as Greece, for one particular example, has taken in an awful lot of the people coming in as refugees into Europe. And of course, Greece has got other problems. They're struggling with a very serious financial crisis anyway, that is compounded greatly by having to also deal with the management and processing of people, claims for asylum arriving on their shore. And of course, so there we have people already struggling for what limited resource there is in some of the most austere of austerity that Europe has, and what little funding is available is going towards this at a time that the Greeks probably at least want to divert it. On the other side of the coin, away from the border of Europe, inside, say, with Germany, where you have 1.1 million refugees taken in just last year. So that's over 1 million people who have arrived in Germany, probably arrived in Europe for the first time, may well have never been in a European country before. Your commentator noted the cold that's setting in, and that's certainly setting in Germany as well. And people then, now that they're there, that's great. They're not suffering in the lands that they've left, but now there's what to do next. And so in these countries where there is also pressures on finances, perhaps not quite like Greece, but where there is the demographics, the population of local communities has changed quite a lot for some of them, we see a lot of resistance to the new neighbors that a lot of people have. And this in some sense erupted to some degree in recent events in Cologne. That has led Germany going from only a few months ago saying, please, refugees, we'll send out buses to collect you and drive you directly to Germany, to now anyone caught up in certain criminal activities will immediately deport you. The line is hardened, and the rhetoric has certainly changed pretty quickly.
And it seems through all of this, Melissa, that a generation of young Syrians are being lost to us, and I don't know. That sounds a bit dramatic, but it's heartbreaking to see what's happening. Could you speak to that, please?
Yeah. So if we go back to inside Syria and to the neighboring countries, in fact, it's of course there's hardly a school operating inside Syria, so the children there are just trying to just survive. I mean, education is a long lost dream for many. In the neighboring countries, I find it shameful that the international community has not come up with the funding necessary to supply and support the schools so that every single Syrian refugee child could be in school. What we're seeing is that many of the children are working instead of being in school. And it's just, frankly, very short-sighted. What we have here is a population of children, of 2 million children in the neighboring countries who are the future of Syria. And if we were to fully fund the education programs and to have these children in schools where they could heal from their trauma and at the same time get an excellent education so that when the time does come, and I really hope it does come, that there's peace in Syria.
Of course.
You have this generation of young Syrians going back. Instead, what do we have? We have a generation of young Syrians who are out of school, who are working in the street, who have not gotten over their trauma. They're being traumatized again. It's really short-sighted. I think, though, luckily, the good news out of the refugee crisis coming to Europe is that all of a sudden the world has taken notice. And they've said, why? Why are all these people coming to Europe now? Well, they're finally recognizing that there has not been enough investment in the neighboring countries that are hosting so many, and for the humanitarian programs that would allow Syrians to live a dignified life in exile in those countries.
You know, and as you said, yes, the world hopes that there will be peace. And in fact, the warring parties are expected to come together in Geneva later this month. The UN is hoping that peace talks will result in the formation of a national unity government. The civil war has led some 4.3 million Syrians, forced them to flee from their country. Well, Turkey has the largest number of refugees by far, hosting close to 2 million Syrians. So let's pause for a moment to watch this report from Sue Turton at a refugee camp in the southern city of Kilis.
Meet the boys from the Kilis refugee camp. These guys have grown up here. They know nothing about Syria other than it's always been at war. But they hear of what's going on across the border on the TV and their parents talking about it. Ali here is 9 and he comes from Moa, and he's heard in the last 2 days they've been dropping bombs on his town. And Abdullah behind me, he's been talking about Madaya. Madaya, of course, with the dreadful images of people starving there. He says he's heard of people just eating paper. Now, they don't know the Syria that wasn't at war, and they certainly don't know there are talks taking place from the 25th of January in Geneva to try and stop this conflict. Now, they don't understand that. They don't really realise that the international community is trying to pull together all sides. But if anything should focus the minds of the politicians and the diplomats who are trying to get those parties around the table, it's these faces.
And Sue is right there, Dibeh. If the children can't get your attention, who can? Dibeh, do you all have the resources that you need if you can just get to the right places to help the refugees?
We do actually, but our biggest operation is inside Syria. In the neighboring countries, in particular in Lebanon and in Jordan, the biggest bulk, if you want, is handled by the UN. We're only helping where we can. We have some projects, but our biggest operation for Syria is inside the country. And yes, we do have the resources. Yes, we do have big teams that are present in country. Actually, our operations for Syria are the biggest for the ICRC worldwide, but we need access. We are ready. We want to do more, we can do more, but we want willingness, we want authorization, we want access to be able to help millions of people. And as you very correctly stated, it is heartbreaking to see how the world is forgetting how people inside Syria are suffering, and they just wait for one striking image or a wave of refugees or migrants going somewhere to remember that it has been 5 years that people are suffering in Syria. We have millions of people now that are really in dire need of help. And when we do talk to people, whether in Jordan or in Lebanon or even inside Syria, it's heartbreaking. Recently, we've been talking to people to see what they expect with another winter coming. And some of them told us, we prefer to die before having to face another winter coming in Syria. And indeed, another winter came. It's extremely cold. Some people are living in very, very harsh conditions. We can see people bringing rubbish and bringing plastic, bringing anything they can find in the street to just try to burn it and have a little bit of heat. And here I don't want to talk about the health hazards that this can cause, but the situation is, heartbreaking is not enough to say what's going on. Children are desperate. They want to just live with their family. They want to find back their friends. They want to find back their environment. And today, only a political solution is actually what will or might bring the conflict in Syria to an end. But while waiting for this political solution, humanitarian actors, the ICRC, the UN agency, SAC, whomever wants to help inside Syria, we need unimpeded access. We need to be able to reach the people and to bring the assistance that we do have for them.
It's just children wanting to be children, and I don't know who can't understand that. Thanks to all of you for this discussion that needs to continue to happen. I'm sure I'll be calling on all of you again. Melissa Flemming, Thom Brooks, Dibeh, Fakhr, thank you all very much. And thank you very much for watching. As always, you can leave your comments on our program's page on our website. It's very easy to find. It is aljazeera.com. You can also post your views on our Facebook page. It is facebook.com/AJ Inside Story, or tweet us at AJ Inside Story. From me, Richelle, Carey, and all the rest of the team here, we very much appreciate you watching. Goodbye for now.